Dorothy Graham adjusted her glasses and offered a measured smile, her black hair neatly framing her sharp features. The name tag on her chest read D. Graham, but it was her posture, upright, composed, that left no doubt about who she was. She crossed her legs, her grip on the notepad just shy of tense, controlled, but firm. There was something unspoken in her bright, light brown eyes, something just out of reach. They were striking, innocent, yet hauntingly familiar. They pulled him back to a face he'd never forgotten. It was like staring into a mirror of lost memories. He could almost see her soul through them. A quiet chuckle escaped him as he shook off the thought. Something about Thomas Adler unsettled Dorothy. His welcoming presence had an indication of subtle vulnerability, but his gaze cut through her like a scalpel. His eyes pinned her in place, unblinking and surgical, as if dissecting her thoughts before she spoke. The man before her rarely left this grand, pristine house. Her research had told her as much. The only person allowed inside his world was Andrew Jones, a man Thomas had plucked from the streets 14 years ago and turned into his personal servant. A quick scan around the lounge she was seated in was enough to notice that not a speck of dust marred the polished surfaces, and every object seemed meticulously positioned, as if following some unseen order. Through the tall windows, the setting sun stained the trees in gold, their long shadows reaching toward the house. The curved gray sofas seemed to flow with the contours of the room, their softness in stark contrast to the sharp precision of the diamond-like lights above. Above Thomas, a painting of a woman gazed down from a gilded frame, her expression poised between knowing and unreadable. A dark purple dress draped over her, the delicate shimmer of her jewelry catching the dim light. She was regal, yet distant, watching, waiting. Dorothy cleared her throat and spoke, her voice steady but gentle. "I know you're not one for interviews," she said, following with a smile measured just enough to soften the moment without giving too much away. "I'm glad you agreed to share this story with me. It's not every day someone like you agrees to talk. I won't take that for granted. I don't want to take too much of your time, so whenever you're ready." She held herself with practiced poise, but the tension was there, in the flicker of her gaze and in the way she straightened her posture. Thomas eased back into his chair, his faint smile unreadable, bemused perhaps, or simply weary. "Well, imagine my surprise when I saw your name popping up. Honestly, I don't even know what you're hoping to get from this. I've told this story more times than I care to count. Some days, I wonder if it would be easier to disappear altogether." He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head before his voice dipped lower. "But for you, I suppose I can tell it once more." Chapter 2. Unusual Friends. Dorothy's pen hovered over her notepad, her expression unreadable. Thomas let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting somewhere far beyond the room. "How long has it been?" he mused aloud. 29 years? Ah, yes. 29 years, and not a single detail has faded. I remember exactly who I was back then, a boy struggling, desperate to prove himself. You know, those were the days when I decided no parties, no alcohol, no girls. I told myself I'd earn those things later, once I'd made something of myself. He paused, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And yet somehow I still found myself in that room, with them. He closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. He opened his eyes, exhaling the weight of old memories. When he met Dorothy's gaze, there was no hesitation, only certainty. "It started as something innocent," he said, his voice laced with the weight of hindsight. "They asked if they could stay at my place for the night. It was during a psychology class, and, naive as I was, I didn't think much of it. If anything, I was eager, maybe even excited. I wasn't the kind of person people gravitated toward, so the idea of making a new friend felt different. I told myself I was just helping, that it was a small favor." His voice falters, his fingers tightening around the armrest before he continues. "I should have known better. I barely knew them. Outside of class, we hardly spoke. They arrived that evening, but they weren't alone. With them was a girl, Kurt's girlfriend. Her name was Olivia Graham. "Take it from this old man, young lady," he said, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. "You're the spitting image of your mother." Dorothy let out a faint smile, her lips curling as if caught between sadness and pride. "We laughed, played games, and drank. For once, I let my guard down. I let myself enjoy it. Kurt and his lady friend eventually disappeared into one of the other rooms, leaving Dan and me to push the night forward with the kind of meaningless conversation two tipsy people can manage. A decent night, I thought, spent with two seemingly decent classmates. But then, around 9 p.m., the peace broke. From the other room, Kurt and his lady friend started arguing. At first, I ignored it. Couples fight. It happens, right? But the argument escalated. Their voices grew sharper, harsher, words slicing through the walls, and then silence. Dan stood up. "I'll check on them," he said, disappearing into the room. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. Something wasn't right. So I followed. But I stopped at the door. The silence inside was thick, suffocating. It was too quiet for people who had just been yelling. The lights were off. From where I stood, nothing seemed out of place, at least not at first. But as I stepped inside, the air shifted. It was heavy, cold. My hands began to tremble. And then I saw it. The moonlight slipped through the window, casting pale blue across the room. In that glow, I saw Kurt, his eyes wide and terrified. Something was terribly wrong. I could feel it.